Hello and welcome to another episode of the Business of Business podcast. I'm your host, Roy. Of course, we are the podcast that brings you a wide variety of guests that speak to a diverse set of topics. Hopefully, we can bring something to light maybe you haven't thought about, or conversely, if you have something that's keeping you awake at night, hopefully we can provide you a solution to that. Today, we are blessed to have Adam Wiseman. He is the founder and lead consultant of Quality Mental Health Interventions Training and Consulting. He is a sought after international speaker with more than 20 years experience working with adults living with mental illness and other intersecting challenges. He managed the forensic assertive community treatment programs at Canada's largest mental health organization and spent several years as a professor of community mental health case management at George Brown College. In 2018, he founded Quality Mental Health Interventions Training and Consulting, which focuses on workplace mental health and teaching the mental health skills necessary to turn toxic relationships with clients and colleagues into productive one. He is also a senior level nonviolent crisis intervention instructor, suicide alertness trainer, and is a certified mental health law in the workplace from Osgood Hall Law, and as a psychological health and safety in the workplace advisor from the Canadian Mental Health Association. Adam, thank you so much for being with us. We certainly do appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Roy. I'm looking forward to having a chat today.
Yeah, and it's we had just a little mental health experience just now with some technical issues that before we get off into that, I want you to tell me a little bit about how you got here, kind of what was your road, and what you do to help companies right now.
Sure. So the way I got here was like most people in my family, there was someone living with mental illness who, had, as much as it was inspiring, it was also quite frustrating, the lack of services that were available and what was out there. So that's what initially got me interested in mental health and mental illness. So I've worked in a variety of settings. I worked in group homes, I worked in employment, and then I started working as a case manager with the Canadian Mental Health Association. And that's really where I really started to fall in love with the work. So I was with them for about 17 years, frontline for about 10, and then spent the balance in management running the forensic mental health program. And forensic mental health is, for people who are unfamiliar, when somebody commits a crime and they're found not in Canada, we call it not criminally responsible, because it's acknowledged that the crime occurred due to their mental illness, not due to them making a sound, rational decision that they, thought about and went forth with, which has different outcomes. And it's very challenging. I mean, it's underfunded. You deal with staff burnout all the time. COVID has given the world sort of a new appreciation for nurses, but it's one that I had going back many years, because seeing them working in the mental health sector is just amazing what they go through. And equally amazing is the patients and the clients that we get to work with, and the challenges that they have, and that they're able to, come forward and live productive lives and achieve, the goals they set out for themselves. And that was really our role. However, included in that role is also monitoring for safety, specifically safety for the clients and for others. To work with this population, where addictions are incredibly high as well, you really had to develop some very specific skills. In large part, it's around how do you help someone achieve the goals that they've set for themselves, when they're also sometimes going to be their own worst enemy. So if you think about, like, anytime maybe someone's tried to quit smoking or has tried a weight loss plan, intellectually, we might know exactly what to write down to achieve it. But right, to actually make that happen, sometimes we need a little help. And that's where experts can come in. So we were never experts on the individuals living with mental illness. We were experts on how to help people achieve a quality of life that's going to be productive and appreciated by the individuals. So an interesting twist came in my career when a asset management company came and said, we would like you to talk with us. And I had started to do some public speaking, and that I was teaching as well at the time and going to conferences. and they said, we'd like you to talk to our advisors a little bit about mental health and mental illness. And I thought, okay, I can give them a mental health, mental illness 101. But then they really pushed me and they said, no, we want the skills. We don't just want the awareness. We want the skills that we can use. And I thought, well, what do I know about financial advisors? Well, it didn't take long after speaking with a couple of them to realize that the same skill set that we're using to try to help people stay on their own treatment plan is what financial advisors need to use to help people stay on their own financial plan as they experience not just the ups and downs of the markets, but also the ups and downs in their own mental health and what's happening in their own lives. Right. So for example, when you go to a financial planner, when something big has happened, you've maybe lost your job, or you've gotten a big promotion, or you've come into an inheritance, which also means that you've lost someone that you love. So all these mental health skills, and a lot of them are borrowed from a specific type of intervention called motivational interviewing, apply directly to the professional sector. After starting to work with the financial planners, it quickly branched out into other groups that would come up. So I presented a conference for financial planners, and a lawyer would come up to me after the presentation and start talking to me about their challenges. So I really began to become quite passionate about trying to support professionals to develop the mental health skills, not just so that they can get better professional outcomes themselves, meaning they can increase their bottom line, but also so that people experiencing mental health challenges can get more equitable service from the experts they're going out to see. Right. So one thing led to another, and eventually that became so busy that I had to leave the Canadian Mental Health Association, and I officially formed my own company, Quality Mental Health Interventions Training and Consulting, which is what we've been doing for the last few years.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting concept to take this to the, like the salesman, and with them having to not only call to, try to get people to sign up, but also managing them, and finance is one that, it can be very, very emotional for the investor, with the ups and downs. And then, like you said, just the life situations that come along. So, one thing I was going to ask is, and I guess part of this is giving them the tools, well, not only for their own mental health, but maybe to understand what the other party is going through as well, to be able to, well, sometimes when we understand, we can choose the right words versus like, hey, I just don't know what's going on with this person.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we focus on, and again, which comes from working directly with people living with mental illness, and maybe I should just for your audience, just quickly mention the difference between mental health and mental illness.
Okay. Yeah.
So mental illness is a specific diagnosis. It affects about 20% of the population. It's things like depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, anxiety disorders. Mental health is what we all have, 100% of people, just like we all have physical health. And some days it's positive and some days it's not positive. Mental health is the same. So somebody with a mental illness, that could affect their mental health, right? So because they're hearing voices which are putting them down and saying horrible things and telling them to hurt themselves, they might experience negative mental health. But they can also have a mental illness and experience positive mental health. Okay. So that's the goal when it comes to somebody living with a mental illness. But the mistake that society has made for a long time, and I feel like COVID has kind of sped up the process of people understanding, is that having a mental illness does not mean you're the only one with mental health. Everybody has mental health. Yeah. So some mental health issues you have to manage your entire life, just like some physical health issues. Diabetes is a good comparator, where diabetes can be managed. You might have to take medication to help with it. You might have to make a couple lifestyle changes, but you can live a long and productive life with diabetes, the same as you can as you take care of your own mental health. And if you did have a mental illness that you were kind of managing at the same time. So it's important to recognize that when we do talk about supporting professionals to develop their mental health skills, we're not talking about just serving that 20% of the population. We're talking about 100% of the population. And just like you've mentioned, that includes themselves. So their relationship with themselves is an important part of that.
Yeah. And I guess to take that further, I think what I'm hearing you say is, so just like myself, I can have poor mental health episodically today because of events that are happening. Doesn't necessarily mean I have a mental illness. And conversely, if you have a diagnosis as mental illness, you can still have good mental health days if you have the tools in which to navigate your illness.
Absolutely. That's exactly it.
Yeah, and yeah, because I'm sure this actually, it has a lot to do with our peers and our work. I'm sure that even management would be managers would be very well served to learn some of these techniques. And I guess most of it starts with listening. Is that correct? Listening and observing behavior.
Absolutely. So much of it is around listening, but and really hearing what a person means, not just jumping on they might say, the classic is, how are you doing? I'm fine. And fine means 10,000 different things.
Exactly.
Right. And if you're married, it means 100,000 different things. So so this idea of really listening to learn about a person and to get a bit more knowledge around their experience is so important. I was listening to your the podcast you did with David Bricker just prior to us talking. And he talked about this innate desire to be listened to. And it's so true. There's nothing more frustrating than when you want to communicate something and you're not able to. And if you're not able to because the other person isn't listening, because they just want to sell you something or whatever it might be, that's going to set up a really negative relationship. Whereas people who master this while still maintaining their boundaries, we're not talking about professionals becoming therapists. We're just talking about them using mental health skills to achieve what I call the golden thread, their professional goals, which are in line with the customer's professional goals. The techniques I teach and the things that I work with, it's not meant for the, quote unquote, used car salesman trying to sell you a lemon. It's meant for the people like lawyers, financial advisors, realtors, human resource professionals, people who are trying to help people achieve what's in their own best interest. So your goals line up with theirs.
Yeah. Yeah, because most of those situations are all very typically emotionally charged interactions. I'm assuming anyway.
Absolutely.
You're having to talk to a lawyer or the HR department. Even if it's a good thing, even if you're interviewing for a job, there can be a lot of stress and anxiety that goes along with that.
100%. And there's things that you can do to help lower your stress and anxiety before things like job interviews or stressful interactions with the HR department or something along those lines.
Right.
But yeah, it's all about how can we, an underlying theme of the mental health for professional relationships course, which is sort of my flagship online course, is the idea that anxiety is the enemy of professional relationships. The more you can help to reduce the client's anxiety, your own anxiety, your supervisor, if you have one, your colleagues, if you have them, the more productive you can be. And productive is different than positive, because Roy, you mentioned a whole bunch of very stressful conversations a person might have. Those might not feel comfortable, but they might be very productive if you've got the skills to make that happen. And that's the ultimate goal. I don't have a secret to make life always feel good and happy. And, sometimes we see these memes on the internet and they can actually be harmful to our mental health because they make it sound like it's so easy to be happy. You just have to look for the positive.
Right.
But that can actually be damaging because toxic positivity is a thing too, where we want you to experience the uncomfortable and to experience the, all the whole range of emotions that makes us human, but then to have productive actions come out of that.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Because I think that's my opinion. I'll ask you as a question is, a lot of times these uncomfortable conversations become toxic because we get off track and we forget about what we're talking about. And then we either, make it personal or about something else. And I just use spouses. Typically they're the easy ones to take your stressors out on. So somebody says, well, could you pick your shoes up by the front door, move those out of the way? And then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, well, you didn't clean up the dishes quick. And, we kind of jump off of that topic. So I imagine some of that skills is remaining on topic, remaining civil, not getting, enraged, and then also not getting personal. So I'll let you address those.
No, 100%. And actually, yeah, like you said that very well. So the idea is to put space between our reactions. So we have a reaction, it's instant, it happens. we don't want to judge it. We don't want to beat ourselves up for it. It's important that we're not getting stuck in there. But in a professional setting, we really have to make sure there's space between our reaction and our response.
Right.
So our reaction is what happens inside. It could be, you know, I remember having a conversation as a manager, and the person was talking in a way that made them seem like my judgmental mind was saying, this person seems really entitled. Like they seem to be really like not getting the fact that this is their job and they're supposed to be here working and all this stuff. And that was my reaction. And my response based on that reaction would be to potentially attack them on that sense of entitlement, which would not be helpful at all.
Right.
So I couldn't control that I had that feeling. And do I want to be judgmental? No, but I didn't beat myself up for feeling that. You put some space in there to think. And then the response is, you know what? I'm curious, what is it that you really want to get out of this job? So I could get a better understanding from the individual about what it is that they wanted. Because what I was judging as entitlement was really them doing me a favor, which is sharing information, because more information is always better, and that they weren't getting everything they wanted out of the job. And if I want someone to be happy and successful, especially in such important work as community mental health work, with a really vulnerable population, then I want them to feel positive and good. And we ended up having a fantastic working relationship. And it really changed how they approached their client base, which if you take that and you move it over into something like financial planning or realtors or whatever, you know that's going to affect the bottom line. You know you're going to increase sales, increase customer loyalty, get multi-generational clients. Right. Because you're really engaging with them as opposed to judging and then just getting these power struggles and these immediate reactions, or even jumping right into what you can do for them and say, look, that has nothing to do with me. All I can do is buy and sell your house. So let's get back to it. Right. So that you can build those relationships. And hopefully, again, as I said, it's not always going to be comfortable, but the goal is productive.
Yeah, and now that you mentioned that, that was something that struck me the very first time that we talked was really putting that separation between the reaction and the response. I mean, we can feel taken aback with our reaction, but not trying to, taking a count of three or whatever before we actually have a response instead of being in a heated situation. And it's funny because I just posted a meme not long ago about things that you can't take back, and that's one of those is the words that come out of your mouth. We can never get those back.
Right.
So,
and the other thing I would suggest is, it's kind of like there's this expression, time heals all wounds.
Yeah.
Not really. Time that's used effectively heals all wounds, right? It might mean counseling's involved. It might mean just self-improvement is involved, self-awareness, spending some time with your emotions, whatever it might be. But just time doesn't really tend to do that much for us. So the same thing with putting time between our reaction and our response. It's how do we use that time? So that's where we can run some filters. That's where we can say things like, am I making a judgment?
Right.
And if so, how can I change that? How can I reword this? Yeah. Am I being attacked? Because usually the answer is no, right? It's not that even if the person seems like they're attacking you, it's probably because you're part of a larger system that's involved. Maybe they're angry at the company that you work with. Maybe they had bad interactions with 5 other people who held your position. It's right. Usually not actually a personal attack. And then you might, and then also confronting our biases, right? And our things which are, because different people come across in different ways based on their background, but also based on your background. That's all going to influence how we interact with each other. Right. And that's where the value of things like diversity training and cultural competency and all that sort of stuff really does blend in, not just with, the idea that we want to live in a more, loving and fair world, but also ultimately with improving the bottom line. The more people you can relate to and connect with in a positive, productive way, the larger your customer base is. So that's why that stuff becomes so important.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier the core, that the mental health struggles, our mental illness struggles, and drugs. Is there studies out there that kind of show which one of those come first? Do people have mental illness that lead to drug use, or is the drug use lead to some mental illnesses?
So the answer is yes.
Okay. Right.
And that's a fantastic and very insightful question.
Yeah.
The truth is, I say yes because it can be both.
Okay.
So very often, for example, if you look at rates of men with depression 50 years ago, almost non-existent. All you had was a bunch of alcoholics. Well, what were these alcoholics doing? People living with alcohol addiction. They were self-medicating their depression, right? So there certainly is that. There also, with some of the opiates and drugs on the market right now, absolutely they can cause organic issues with the brain, and people can develop long-term mental health issues based on using substances. And then, so you have this kind of double fold. One is people maybe who are trying to self-medicate in a mental illness, so the illness came first. And then you can also develop certain mental health issues based on drug use. We are, like, anecdotally, from speaking with community workers, we're seeing more and more of people who are seem to have an addiction issue first and a mental illness second. Even to the point where some people who are thought to have a mental illness, when they're able to get away from the opiates and clean, they sometimes they don't actually have a mental illness, and they're able to get into just functioning. And they may always consider themselves someone with addiction issues, and they might always need counseling and things on that, because addiction issues on their own are now considered a mental illness, and that can certainly exist concurrently with other illnesses.
Yeah.
So it's a tough question to answer. Absolutely, though, drugs impact people's mental health, and some people do have long-term, very serious consequences of it.
So, and I don't want to, kind of go down that rabbit hole too far, but one more question is that, so sometimes we self-medicate with, alcohol, drugs, whatever, but if we weren't self-medicating, could we maybe employ tools that would help us with our mental health? Whereas if we're self-medicating, we're not able to use those tools?
So the mental health treatment has really taken a very progressive approach, which has proven to be very effective. So I should also mention, so in my background, I'm also a project manager. I also do something called Six Sigma, which is process improvement through data management. I'm an outcomes guy. I'm not a kumbaya, this feels good, so let's do it kind of person.
Right.
I want to see, if I'm doing something, I want it to work. Right. So like when working as a community mental health worker, if I went to someone's house and all I did was sit and have a coffee with them and chat, that might feel good. And I might feel like I've done a lot. And sometimes that means more than you think. But if that's all that I'm doing, if that's all I'm bringing to the table, that's kind of that feel good idea. What I want to do is bring in some of those tools from cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, help the person really to move in the direction that they want. So no matter where someone is at on the mental health spectrum, from very ill to absolutely healthy, there's always interventions that we can assist with and things that they can do. So even someone who's very actively addicted to opiates and living with a serious mental illness, there's things they can do to improve their mental health, and it's incremental. And the hope is that they get to the point where they say there's some ambivalence in terms of saying, you know what, I do drugs because I like how they make me feel. For an hour, I don't have any problems, and I'm living in poverty, and I'm living with all this mental, the symptoms of my mental illness and all this. But I wonder if I had a bit more money to go out for coffees with my friends, I wonder if life would be a little bit better. And that's where we can jump in and say, interesting, tell me more about how life could be better if you had more money to spend and time with your friends. So it's not quitting the drugs necessarily that's the first part of the intervention. It's increasing their social life. And then one kind of feeds off the other.
Okay, interesting.
So you don't have to wait to be well. Just like if you had a broken leg, you don't have to wait for it to heal to start treating it. Right. You've got to start treating it in order to heal.
Exactly. Okay. So, this is, I guess after we come through COVID, what are some observations that you've had over this last year? And then, I feel like we're going through a critical state of reopening. People are getting back. I don't know. It's been such a divisive time for a lot of reasons, but, I guess just what are your thoughts on, what you've seen over the last year versus, what's coming up for us?
Well, there's things that I've seen, and then there's also studies. Luckily, they've done a lot of work on kind of where people are at. They've definitely seen a huge spike in terms of people identifying as having mental health challenges and experiencing mental health crises. I know a company called Bridgehouse Asset Management did some research with a company called Navigator, and they found that 92% of financial planners identify that they work with clients who are having mental health challenges, who have made bad decisions based on their mental health. So it's definitely affecting everyone. What I'm seeing anecdotally now, in addition to, and also there was things around increases in domestic violence, and that's often can be due to stress, increase in self-harm activities, children experiencing major increases in terms of their anxiety and mental health challenges that they're having. So we're definitely seeing that. And anecdotally, what I'm seeing now is a lot of anxiety around what's going back to work going to look like. Is it going to be, us all working out of our cubicles in the same way? Is it going to be a 50-50 kind of thing? I heard a great phrase called COVID keepers, which are, there's a lot of good stuff that happened during this pandemic. People got more family time. People spend more time with their pets and animals, which actually has a great impact on people's mental health. So some anxiety around losing some of those things that we might think of as positive, and as well of is there a way for me to keep both? And progressive employers and employers who want to hang on to people are definitely going to have those conversations with their employees, because people who've been working from home for a year and a half now, a lot of them aren't keen to sit in 2 hours of morning traffic every day to get to the office, to go up and do what they can do from their home office. So some anxiety around that, and it should be interesting to see. But I think a lot of hope. People are ready for life to get a little bit more back to normal and to engage. And people who initially thought working from home is awesome, I never have to go into the office, I can work in my pajamas and this and that, after a year and a half, they're expressing loneliness. And most people seem to want to blend a certain amount of days in an office and then a certain amount of days at home, to allow that flexibility.
And we've shown that it can be done in a lot of instances. And I just actually published a piece this morning on my personal website about this, that, because what I keep hearing is a lot of, like a big brush for the door that, people have been talking about, that we've become used to working from home. And those that want to stay at home are saying, look, I'm not going back. I'll just go find another job. The market has been good enough. People are shorthanded everywhere. They've had that option. But I think it's kind of going along with this lines of, I think it's good to ask the question, because you're right. I think there are about 3 camps of people. There are the people like me that I like being at home. I get more done, not interruptions. I get enough socialization, on Zoom meetings and talking and with family. But there are some people that really, it's hard for them to function without that social interaction. And then, working in groups, you get some synergies, things like that. And then, like you said, there are those people that be like, I'd like to go in for a day or two, but spend the other, 2 or 3 days at home. So I think as an employer, I just feel like, we really have to ask this question, and it's part of getting to know our people. And because I think I'm assuming that, we could have some poor reactions, based on exactly what you want and what you're mandated to do.
And you hit the nail on the head again there, Roy, which is, you got to ask, because the days of, worker number 27643 coming in and punching a ticket and all this stuff, sure, there still may be environments that are that work that way. But for a large part, it's time. If I was to give employers one piece of, let me give them 2 pieces of advice. The first would be implement the psychological health and safety standards. Canada has a national standard that's optional right now, but it is a world leading standard based on other countries which have developed the same. But that puts in place, that makes sure that the environment is not causing psychological harm. And the second piece of advice would be, get to know your staff. Get to know them really well. Get to know who is rushing to pick up and drop off their kids. Get to know who really loves the break of leaving the home life where it's very chaotic and coming into the office. Get to know who enjoys like team building events and things of that nature, and who are the people that are really afraid of it. And you can start to put together teams that really represent people from every angle, because that's going to help you to better serve the clients, because I can guarantee you the clients are coming from every angle as well. So like if you take me, for example, I love that I can meet with my doctor over similar to Zoom. We have something called the Ontario Telehealth Network.
Yeah.
But it's similar to Zoom, it's just a little more secure. It's amazing. Why on earth do I want to sit in unless I need something physical like checked? It's great.
Yeah.
Whereas for other people, they don't trust it and they're worried that they're not able to communicate effectively. And it's also important that we recognize, like as a man, when I was managing with the Canadian Mental Health Association, some staff I didn't see very often at all because they were out in the community all the time. So I could have a quick chat on the phone. Anyone can sound happy and content for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. Even often some of the most depressed people can still pull that off. And if they can't pull it off on a Zoom, they can definitely do it in a text.
Yeah.
So it is different than seeing people 7 hours a day when you can really see who's dragging, who's not dragging, who might need a little bit more support that day. Yeah. So getting in touch with that, really getting to know those staff is going to be crucial for retention.
Yeah, definitely. And the other part of, I like what you say about getting to know your employees, because that was something, when I had a lot of people working for me, I took that time to know, I knew them, I knew their families, I knew their wives, their kids. We had, outside functions outside the workplace, because it gave me a good indication, because I had people that, they were just grumpy. I mean, they were grumpy and that was who they were, versus people who, tended not to be as grumpy, but you could tell when there was a change in their demeanor, and be able to go out and say, hey, what's up? Because, and not in a threatening way, but like, I'm here to help. Because I think what we have to understand is whatever's happening at home, it comes to the workplace, and whatever happens in the workplace goes home. Not many people that I know are able just to check it at the door and say, you know what, I had a really terrible day at work, but I'm not going home and, slam the door or do whatever people do.
Yeah. And there are techniques to help with that. Yeah. There are things that you can do, mindfulness exercises and things that you could do in your car before you go into your home. Yeah. I was talking, I'm part of a really cool group that a friend of mine, David Cohen, put together. It's called a mastermind group, and we sort of read different books and support each other and come up with different ideas. But one of the ones that one of the participants shared was, a lot of people do mantras in the morning. They'll say like this, this is my goals for the day and I'm going to accomplish them in that. But the idea of doing it twice a day, once before work and then once before going into your house. So before work, my mantra might be connected to, I'm going to be productive today. I'm going to get everything on my to-do list done. And I'm going to make 2 phone calls to people to try to work on, to do some networking, right? And then before going back into the house, saying, I am going to be an amazing partner. I'm going to be an amazing dad. These are the things I want to accomplish. I'm going to have a one-to-one conversation with each of my kids. I've got 4 kids, so that, you got to book the time. And that idea of a second mantra to help to put some separation between the two. So at work, it helps you to leave the home life a little bit, even though we acknowledge you never completely leave it. And when you're coming home, you leave the work life a little bit, even acknowledging that, as you said, you can never totally. But one of the really negative things that's come out of the working from home is for people who haven't been able to set boundaries, maybe they haven't been taught or they never thought about it, didn't come across. Instead of working from home, they're living at work. So their work is constantly around them, and they've got all their computer stuff set up in their bedroom. So as they're going to sleep, they're seeing that there's emails coming in on their computer and all this kind of stuff, and that can be really detrimental to a person's mental health.
Yeah, and I'll check the box on that one. And it's even more complicated for myself because I always enjoy what I do, and so it's not like a drudgery, like I got to go do this. I mean, there's always some sense of excitement and getting things done and being productive, and it is a difficult thing to turn that off. We've just had to regroup around my house and say, okay, here's our definite hard stop, no more, because I have to admit the last 3 or 4 months I'd gotten a little bit out of hand about being up all hours of the day and night, and like you said, phones going off in the middle of the night, because I deal with people all over the world. So it's always somebody's always open, and during my 24-hour period. So it's and it's not only just for me. I'm sure it improves my health, because I've got to start, getting back out and walking, doing, eating right, eating, kind of getting back to a schedule, but also helps the family life, because that's another thing, happy wife, happy life. So a lot of things to consider.
Yeah, definitely the goal is to have a home that's full of contentment and happiness. No
Exactly.
matter what the family unit might look like. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And, I think the awareness between situational, because this is where I was kind of trying to think about this a while ago, talking about, really getting to know your people, that situational. And then, I guess the people that maybe are having some more chronic, long or acute, well, the chronic issues, more long-term issues. And I think that companies have become very well about providing services for employees, but number one, I don't think that information has been disseminated enough to let everybody know. But I have to think that there's also still a stigma. Like, if I have to go tell my boss that I'm struggling, is he going to be like, yeah, that guy's on his way out, we're going to go ahead and start, looking for somebody new, even though it's probably, it's illegal to do that, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
it's still, people are scared about it. So people are scared to raise their hands and say, you know what, I need help. And I don't know. I guess that's probably the biggest message that we could hope to deliver from this talk, is that don't be afraid to reach out for help.
Yeah, and I mean that's part of like when I talk about the psychological health and safety standard, you don't need a standard to say that I want my workplace to be psychologically healthy and safe, right? Basically, it means less time off, it means less or not less time off, but less sick time off from staff. It means less presenteeism, which is one of the most rampant things right now, taking money out of businesses' bottom lines, is people coming to work but who just mentally aren't able to, and who, if they did take a day off, maybe they could take the time to catch their breath and to kind of reset their compass. Often it takes more than a day and it takes a series of things, but at least to get moving on it. So do you have a place where someone could say, I really need a mental health day today? And the other thing is around employee assistance programs, which most companies now offer. There was some interesting work done around that where, the question was raised. So if we're a great company because our staff don't use the EAP service, the employee assistance program, a lot.
Right.
Well, that doesn't mean that you're a great company.
Right.
Most likely what that means is either it's an inadequate service, which isn't, it is insurance companies running, offering counseling and things like that. Or it is that staff don't trust it. They don't trust the organization, so they don't believe that it's anonymous and that if they call in, because at the end of the day, those EAP services usually offer, or it could also be that staff aren't aware of the service and what they can use it for. Because most of them offer things from budgeting to like people going through divorce and through everything. So if your company has very low EAP use, then it means that your staff are these magical staff who don't experience loss, who don't experience divorce, who never have financial issues, because those are all unwork related things that an EAP service can help with. And if they're not going for that stuff, they're probably not going for the feelings of burnout that they're getting at work and some of those other challenges they're experiencing. Or even if they're having a challenge with a colleague, that's something you can potentially go to your EAP about and get some direction around how you can work through it in a I use the word psychologically safe. What we're really talking about is trying to remove as many things that cause psychological harm in the workplace,
Right.
and trying to put things in place that promote psychological health, and having an open communication between management and staff that's not based on trying to assign blame. It's based on trying to solve problems.
Right.
That's a major part.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge aspect, even with all different aspects of our businesses. A lot of times we spend so much time trying to figure out who to blame that we're not really focused on finding a solution. And one thing I'll add to the EAP issue is taking care of aging parents. Back in the 60s and 70s, the issues were, around childcare, childbirth, things like that. And now we've progressed that, a lot of people my age are having to spend more and more time taking care of their parents and loved one. And, it becomes a real stressor for people as well.
Absolutely. And let me give an example with that one specifically of an accommodation that I did with a staff member who didn't come to me. I went to them. And I could just tell, and again, because they were an all-star, you mentioned that you love your work. Those people are just as at risk. In fact, you could make a case that they could be even more at risk of burnout because they're burning the candle at both ends. I know I went through a period where I was way overextended. And I'm sitting there doing these trainings with companies and I'm working on the PowerPoint. And I'm like, I had a broken leg at the time. And it's 3 a.m. and I'm writing about how important sleep is to your, to your health. Right. And you do run into these cases of the cobbler's kids have no shoes. Exactly. But no one's immune to it, right? No, like it affects everybody. So yeah, we definitely want to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves so that we can be present and effective.
Yeah, and it's a professional hazard. We have to be careful what we write, because I've had my partner Terry, she's like, are you actually reading what you're writing here? Because you could probably apply that to your life too.
I'm not going to say that my partner has ever said that to me in arguments or anything, but certainly none of us are perfect all the time. Yeah.
So
nothing worse than having your own work thrown in your face.
Yeah. Exactly.
What's this about listening? What's this about exactly. Making sure you understand the other person first? Yeah.
Exactly. So what are some tips that you would give? I know it's a wide category. We've talked about like maybe that the financial person in that sales role, or the real estate person or lawyer. And then we've also talked kind of about managing individuals in the workplace. But what are some tips that you could just throw out there that could help everybody some?
In terms of things they could do for themselves?
Yeah, themselves, or even relating to others better.
So when it comes to things that people can do for themselves, mindfulness is an evidence-based, very useful set of body of knowledge. It can be all kinds of different aspects. One that I use a lot is box breathing, which I'll just explain because it's so simple. I actually did it just before we started our conversation. It's a way that I like to get myself into either peak performance or sometimes just to transition from one activity to another. And what I like about box breathing, especially when I'm training in companies, because some of the companies I work in, they have quite a high energy staff. Maybe they're working in, where they're pushing stocks and bonds and that kind of stuff. And the energy is different than in the nonprofit sector, right? And it's kind of like a hoorah, let's go, and that. So I like box breathing because like people who do yoga are familiar with it, but it's also used by Navy SEALs in the States, by SWAT teams, by police. It's just very effective, right? And I'm talking about right before they breach a building. Yeah. So if you're so tough that mindfulness isn't for you because you're this tough person and everything, you have to be tougher than a Navy SEAL if you're going to tell me that this breathing exercise can't help you, right? So it's basically, you just picture building a box in your mind. You breathe in, it's all the breathing is done through your nose, in and out. You breathe in for a 4 count, you hold it for a 4 count. And as you're breathing, you're kind of tracing this box in your head. So you breathe in for a 4 count, hold for a 4 count, breathe out for a 4 count, hold for a 4 count. And you just keep doing that in a cycle for a few minutes. And it really helps to drop the anxiety and to get your breathing in line. It helps with like your parasympathetic response and all these sorts of things, so that you can be clear and focused on what you're doing. You don't want to end up in a panic, right? So it can be very, very useful that way. So that's one technique that people can use. The one that nobody likes is diet and exercise is very effective at helping everybody in terms of how they're able to manage stress.
Yeah.
Probably the most useful one is just reach out to the people around you. I guarantee you're not the only one struggling. If you reach out to someone and you don't get a productive response, don't let that stop you from reaching out to somebody else. Yeah. There was one, I presented with someone from the Canadian Medical Association, and they presented this amazing slide. They said, if you want to see what stigma looks like, look at this slide. And it said, how many doctors would support a colleague who came to them with a mental health challenge? And you see this bar on the bar graph up at like 95%. And then it said, how many doctors would go to a colleague with a mental health challenge? And it was like 20%. Right. And that's exactly what stigma looks like. this fear of, and it's not that stigma is not real. You could go to your employer, and your employer absolutely could, if they're not progressive or knowledgeable on mental health issues, could do something that goes against your human rights or your rights in the workforce. And sometimes you do have to go that route. But what we want to do is obviously reduce that stigma. But that idea that so many people are willing to help and so few people are willing to ask for it is a real paradox in our society. And hopefully we're moving towards more and more people saying, you know what, I am going to talk about this. But when it comes to self-disclosure, you do have to gauge, that's why trust is so important. And also, again, going back to that idea of anxiety is the enemy of professional relationships. If you're a manager, your staff's anxiety is a problem. You want to get that down as low as possible so that you can have a productive relationship, and then they're more likely to come to you with a challenge. So around that idea of the sandwich generation of people taking care of kids and parents. So I had this staff member who was great, but I could tell was exhausted, and it didn't seem to be caring as much about the work. So I could make a judgment and say, oh, they don't care about the work anymore. They're jaded. It's time to get rid of them, or at least write them off as an effective staff member, whatever. I had the conversation with them, and they had an elderly parent, and they said, we get an hour for lunch, and I appreciate that it's flexible and I can take it when I want, but it takes me 20 minutes to drive back to my house where I have to check in on my parent, or I have to check in on my father. I have 20 minutes and then I got to race back here, and I'm not even getting time to eat anything and all this. So we looked at the requirements of the position and said, well, why don't you take a 2-hour lunch and work an hour later? Right. And they said, oh, that would really help. On some days, except there are days that I've got to pick up my kids and I can't work an hour later. And I said, okay, well, come back to me with some ideas. Right. And they came back with a schedule. They got everything done. They put in the same hours as everybody else, and a complete 180 back to being an all-star on the team.
Yeah.
And they went actually onto a leadership position. So it's communication and trust can be very powerful, but it's got to be earned on both parties.
Right. Yeah. And that flexibility, because it's funny you mentioned that paper that I just published today, mentioned that about, and I know we have deadlines and we have meetings. There are certain things that happen at a certain time that we just have to be present for. But if you're writing a report, or if you're doing some analysis, typically, if you're in the early or middle stages of a project, does it really matter if you do that at 10 in the morning or at 8 at night? Whenever you could be productive, if you have like that, taking the extra time for lunch to be in a good mindset. The other thing I think it does, or it's done for me, is I feel gratitude to my employer.
Yes.
I want to make sure I give enough back that you can see that I recognize and appreciate what you're doing for me. So I don't mind giving a little bit extra. Important to remember.
Yeah. And if you look at loyalty to employers, it's probably at an all-time low and high right now, depending on how well your company navigated the COVID experience. Because I think that it did remind people, because we, millennials and younger, some of the Gen Zs and stuff like that, statistically, I'm not stereotyping it, statistically, they job hop a lot more than boomers used to. And even, you could argue that Generation X is sort of the last group who really thinks in terms of, I'm going to have a 30-year career at this company, right? A lot of people are doing gig work and moving back and forth and all this kind of stuff. And so to build that loyalty does mean that you're going to reduce you're going to improve your retention rates. And any study that you look at, retention is definitely a piece of gold that you want to be able to mine. Because every time you bring in a new staff, it's not just bringing in new staff. It means that you're adding to the existing staff a training role. So they also start to get more burnt out, and you can end up in these vicious circles. Again, I mentioned nurses before. Nurses get burnt out. Like the amount of people are sort of like, okay, this group can do this and this group can do that. And nurses, well, you guys just have to figure out a way to do it, right? Whether it's COVID, whether it's anything, it's like, find a way and get it done. So nurses would burn out. They end up on stress leave, which means you've got a lowered number of nurses. Well, then they get burnt out because they're doing the work of an extra person, and you've brought in a new nurse who has to be trained. So they're also trying to train, and then you lose another nurse to it. Right. By the end of it, you have nurses who've only worked there for 6 or 7 months, training the new ones coming in because everyone's either leaving or on leave. and it really becomes quite detrimental. If you translate that to a for-profit company, you can see how that would really, you're just, what you end up with is dirty water. And what I mean by that is if you take a clean fish and you put it into dirty water, you don't end up with clean water. You end up with the dirty fish. You got to clean the water.
Yeah.
And that's that environment of how we support each other and sort of what the lines of communication look like.
Yeah, and if that goes on long enough, I think also what you see is a breakdown in processes and procedures, because nobody was here to really train me correctly. And now I'm training you, and I've got maybe half the story, and it just, as we do this consistently over the long term, it gets to where, we have zero knowledge transfer, and people aren't doing what they need to do in the job itself.
100%. And ultimately, how management then deals with that says a lot about the emotional intelligence and the expertise of the management. Because if they just start blasting people for making mistakes with procedures that they were never properly shown, you're going to lose good employees.
Right.
And you know who sticks around? The worst ones.
Yeah.
The ones who are just phoning it in, who don't want to go anywhere and all that. But you know what? Even they can be engaged and fired up and active, because at the end of the day, people want to contribute. People want to be passionate, no matter what the work is. Finding that zen, that just love of doing the task, no matter if it's a mundane task or a complex task, and engaging all those people is just about finding out what their why is. Why do they come to work? What is it that they get out of it? Why, what gets them excited, and then putting in the how. So how can we shape your position so that you're doing more of the things that you love, which is going to help us, doing less of the things you don't love, like documentation and data entry and all that kind of stuff. And let's get creative. And when you have a workforce that's engaged, they drive. You don't need to pull them, right? They push towards it.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of companies realize the actual true dollar outlay for turning over employees. Some of the lower level employees, it can cost $5,000-$6,000 to turn them over, and as you start working up to professional C-suite people, it gets astronomical. But it's not a line item on an income statement, and so I think a lot of times people just disregard it, but they don't understand the true impact dollar wise. And then also, as we bring people in, if they're toxic, they can poison the pool as well, kind of like you said, the dirty water. So and one of my sayings is always, be an employer of choice, don't be an employer of last resort, because that gets you in a lot of trouble too. All right.
Yeah, and also, how do you put a price on losing an individual who was starting in the mailroom and who 15 years from now was going to be one of your maybe C-suite people with all this great experience, who'd been led by great managers, who's now been conditioned to have great instincts, and as well as having good knowledge of policies and procedures and how to do change management because they've seen it, right? But when they left after 6 months because it wasn't there and they went somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. Adam, we appreciate you taking time out of your day. There's so much to cover. I know we probably didn't even hit the tip of the iceberg, so I'm going to give you an invite to, please come back and join us, and we can delve off more into this. I think it's so important. I think it's a pivotal time because, just honestly, when the COVID started, I thought we might see a lot of misbehavior. I don't know how else to say it, like criminal activity and fights and things like that. But we didn't, I think, because people were home, we were separated, and then also there was that extra level of support by governments to help with the unemployment. But now it seems as all of this is going away and we're getting back to normal, I know, around where I live in the Dallas area, the road rage, the shootings, all of these violence has just really taken off over the last month or so. I mean, like to crazy levels that all these local police departments are having to come out to make, statements to address it. It's so bad.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, when we see a crisis like, when the world was running out of toilet paper, everyone was on their rush to find toilet paper. We immediately think, okay, the solution is we got to get more toilet paper accessible to more people.
Right.
Well, right now we have a mental health crisis because everyone's gone through a traumatic experience. However, they experience, some people had good stuff happen, some not so good, but everyone's gone through this weird, like, you know, a lot of anxiety and that sort of piece. And right now what we need is mental health support. We need the government to maybe increase funding for counseling and things of that nature. And just because you can't see it doesn't make it any less real. And that's the crisis that we have right now. And it does, because governments aren't really stepping up in this regard, it does come back to employers, but also to all of us to really develop those skills. And that's part of why some of the work I do is directly with companies. But a lot of the work that I do is directly with individuals, because there's a lot that you can do. Even if your workplace isn't going to change, there's a lot that you can do to take care of your own mental health, to make you more effective, and to make a clear decision on, you know, maybe that's not the workplace where you want to thrive. Right. But, and then go find it.
Yeah.
Because it's out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we can even be better for those people around us. You know, we can recognize better when people need help. Maybe we don't have to make them ask us, but also removing that stigma to be sure, ask for help if you need it. And then also employers to be aware that, you know, there's some fragile individuals out there right now that we need to really seek to understand what they're going through, what we could do to help them. It's
Yeah.
going to be an important time going forward for sure.
And those are likely to be all stars of the future, because like you said, it builds that loyalty.
Yeah.
Right. When somebody helps you out, you want to do, you want to show that you appreciate it. And that's really how you build psychologically positive workspaces.
Yeah. And you know, the other thing I was going to mention earlier, I forgot, was the talking about the 4 square breathing. But I've never really thought about that between events. So I'm going to try to do that, you know, as I switch gears, because what I started doing it at night. Well, I do it in the morning, but then I added the evening one just to kind of clear my mind for sleep. And it's been very effective just to sit quietly, mindfully. And so I think that would help a lot with that anxiety of transitioning, you know, as we run through our day, just to take a minute to go through that exercise before we start that next task.
Yeah, especially like if you're driving to work and you start getting all, you know, wound up because you know you've got to confront somebody when you go in, and you're afraid it's going to be, you know, it's someone who doesn't take feedback well or something like that, and so you're really anxious. Before you get out of your car, you just take 2-3 minutes, do some box breathing, and you approach everything differently. When I do live trainings, it's commonly something that I'll get everyone to do right after the break, and it really brings everyone back into the room, and you know, it leaves the phone calls that they had to make at the break and all that kind of stuff. It helps to transition out of that. And yeah, it's very helpful. What I did want to mention is actually, if you do that, I think it was 20 minutes a day, they actually say it changes how you breathe in general. So you're taking longer, deeper breaths, and and you'll experience lower anxiety as a baseline.
Okay.
So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, because I know it's something I've found out about myself is I'm usually a very shallow breather, and I think that's something that we really need. I've been told, you know, to work on taking those deep breaths, making sure we're getting enough oxygen flowing around, because it doesn't even have to be a tense situation, but just more something when I'm really engaged and really paying attention to what I'm doing. You know, you kind of forget that, and you just I'll catch myself taking shallower breaths. So.
Yeah, you want to get in that flow where everything's where your body feels good, your brain feels good, you're working. And then when it's time to stop working, though, you know, you say, I'm really excited about this and I can't wait to get to it tomorrow because I'm spending the rest of the night with my family, and that's what I'm going to have. Yeah.
Right. All right. So what is a habit? Now we've talked about a few in here, but what is a habit that you just couldn't do without in your daily life, either professional or personal, either one?
Habit that I could not do without.
There's
a few. I can tell you, I think that for me, it is honestly just how I use that space between reactions and responses. I learn more about myself in that time too. I see my own biases come out, and there's so many different types of you know, conscious and unconscious bias that we're always kind of trying to work through. And it's changed how I interact with my children, how I interact with my partner Kristen. It's really I would say that's the biggest one, is the idea of just not reacting all the time, and like just taking that opportunity. Now, in addition to that, certainly the days I exercise are a lot better than the days I don't. The days that I'm eating non-processed, healthier foods are a lot better than the days that I don't. And I actually, the other big one just in the last few years is I've finally got sleep, with something I struggled with for a long time. And I finally got my sleep under control. So I do get a minimum of 8 hours of sleep a night now. And that's really made a big difference. And that's from having a sleep routine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's important in that reactionary part, because to me, sleep is my trigger for everything. It's for eating bad. It's for not exercising. It's for not drinking water, because now all of a sudden I need coffee or soda pop to, keep you on that, keep your energy built up. And so that's usually the start if I don't get. And so that's been one of the things that, as we've implemented, trying to cut things off at a certain time, is making sure to get that rest. Very, very
Yeah.
important.
What I think of it almost like a video game. So think of it as though you have an anxiety meter, right? And just like in a video game, you've got that big green line, and the more times they hit you, it goes red, 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 and then you got a problem. I think of anxiety the same way. So I look at my own anxiety and I say, hey, where is it at? What's one thing I could do today that could bring it down? Because I know that's going to help my professional relationships. And then when I'm interacting with someone, I think, well, what's one thing I could do to bring their anxiety down? And I really picture it like almost like a meter. In the course, I think there's actually a slide where it looks that way, and you see sort of an anxiety meter and how you can help to influence people to be more productive. Right. Which, whether it's colleagues or whether it's clients or it's yourself, what's better than that, right? Being more efficient with your time, getting the results that you want. Some people think it's slower because you have to take that extra time in the beginning. But it's like any investment. You take the extra time in the beginning and then things start going, because, slow, there's that expression, slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? They use that in the shooting sports a lot when they talk about movement. I've done a little bit of work with the police and things like that. So I've adopted some of their turns of phrase. Yeah. But it's 100% true. You take your time in the beginning, you do it right, you get to know exactly what you're doing, you find out exactly why someone is motivated to do what they do, and then you work on the how, and then you bring it forward, and things start moving very differently. So if a month is going to pass and you're going to make $10,000, but you did it with 100 different clients and you didn't really get to know any of them, and next month you have to find a whole new set of 100 clients because you lost most of them, or you could make $15,000 with 50 clients because you're better able to meet their needs and get them to where they want, and they want to stay with you and they want to work with you forever. Well, even though you spent more time with that 50, isn't it more efficient? Isn't it more productive?
Right.
And that's the goal.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. All right. How could people reach out and get a hold of you? And also, is your training course available just to everybody, or is it something you present in person?
So I do live training with usually organized by companies. So it'll either be their HR department, or sometimes it's just different people within an organization who might have seen me talk. I do a lot of talks on mental health and the financial advice relationship. However, to give an example, so my company was taking off. I had all these conferences booked, and that's when I said, okay, I'm going to leave. I can't, I've had 2 jobs my whole life. I'm going to go down to 1 job. And, this was in, a couple of years ago, and 3 months later, COVID hit. Oh, wow. And all the conferences were canceled. And I said, well, I kind of miss work, having a pension and things of that nature. So I started thinking, okay, I've got to pivot here. And luckily everything picked up virtually. So now it doesn't feel quite the same, but I present in Vancouver. I just do it from here, from my office, which is in just east of Toronto. Okay. But so then I developed some online offerings so that I could still reach out to people and they can get the information without having to sit in a group and without having to come in and do it. And the nice thing is the feedback is people love that it's self-paced. Yeah. So I have mental health for professional relationships is my largest course. It only takes about 7 hours to go through. It's accredited by a couple law societies, the Human Resource Professionals Association, Financial Planning Canada, Registered Insurance Brokers of Ontario. So a lot of people who earn continuing education credits, it's either pre-eligible for, or almost 100% of the time it will be eligible for if they submit them. And that's the big one that focuses in on those skills that we talked about of both de-escalating, so when things are getting heated, and then motivating. So how do you help somebody to move forward? And focuses on understanding, awareness, and skills. So you could have a big background in mental health, you'll still get a lot out of the course, or you could have no background in mental health and you'll still get a lot out of the course. And it's designed that way. And also that you can take it at your own time. So it takes about 7 hours to go through, but we give you 120 days to complete it because it's designed for professionals.
Okay.
And then there's also a couple free offerings on there. One is a really short one, which I recommend all your listeners to give a try, which is a burnout scale. And it says, how burnt are you? It's got a picture of a guy with a horrible sunburn on. And it uses an evidence-based tool in there. And you can actually see kind of where you rank in terms of should you be spending a little bit more time on your own mental health. So I have those online courses, and then I do live training, and I also do public speaking at various conferences and things of that nature. Best way to get in touch with me is either by email at Adam at QMHI, which stands for Quality Mental Health Interventions, training and consulting.com. So Adam at QMHIconsulting.com. Or if you track me down on LinkedIn, I'm always happy to make new connections. I love LinkedIn because then you actually get to know a little bit more about the person as well who's connecting. And if you go to mentaldiversity.com, so mental, we think about diversity. Usually we're thinking more in terms of potentially, skin color, religion, things of that nature. Here we're really talking about mental diversity in terms of how someone's cognitive ability is, on that day. How are they experiencing the world different from other people? So if you go to mentaldiversity.com, that's where you'll find the online courses. And I thought to encourage some of your listeners to sign up, if they use the code ROY50, they'll get 50% off of the mental health for professional relationships course. So so hopefully that's something that people will take advantage of. All I ask in return is give an honest review, because we learn so much from that. It's really helpful.
Okay, great. Well, we appreciate that. And just to challenge everybody to reach out and look at this material. It's so important now. It's probably never been more important than it is now. And let's see how we can help each other out, where we can all just try to get along and survive. That's what we want to do. And I think you mentioned that we just want to be heard, so we need to be good listeners as we go through that process as well,
which makes us better communicators and more likely to be heard by others. So
yeah.
It really is that's why I love this work. It really is one of those things where there's no loser. It's win-win across the board.
Exactly. All right, Adam. Well, thanks so much. We appreciate it. That's going to do it for another episode of the Business of Business podcast. Of course, you can find us at www.thebusinessofbusinesspodcast.com. We're on all the major podcast platforms, iTunes, Stitcher, Google, Spotify. If we're not on one that you use, please reach out. I'd be glad to get it added. We also are on all the major social media networks, typically hang out more on Instagram. So reach out, engage with us there. Also, a video of this interview will go up on our YouTube channel when this episode goes live. So go over and check that out. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of your business.
Thanks so much, Roy.